podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome to a special edition of Tennis Unfiltered. It's Tennis Unfiltered Raw, because if it wasn't going to be unfiltered enough, it's going to be unedited as well, because this is our special late night edition, or in Calvin's case, early evening, and in my case, frankly, early morning. You're probably sick of hearing what time it is in Melbourne, but it is just about to turn 6 a.m. here in Melbourne. I've just got back to my hotel, and I thought nothing more I would rather do than call up Calvin and talk about tennis for the next 40 minutes or so. There really is only one place to start. I know I always say that, but there really is, and it is, of course, the second latest finish in Grand Slam history. Andy Murray beat Thanasi Kokkinakis in 5 sets. He finished at 5 minutes past 4 in the morning. Only one match has ever gone later in Grand Slam history. That was Leighton Hewitt and Marcos Baghdatis back in 2008. They went to 4:34 for reasons as yet undiscovered. Murray came from 2 sets down, something he's now done a staggering 11 times in his career. The turning point, you probably could argue and would argue, came when he trailed 2 sets and a break, had a break back point, hit 4 defensive lobs, landed one over Kokkinakis' head. He hit the ball into the net and then hit his racket into the court. And from then on, there were 3 hours of grit and grind and everything we've come to know from Andy Murray over the years. Calvin, it's too raw and too fresh in my mind. Give me some insight. I mean, was this Murray winning it or Kokkinakis losing it?
You'd have to say, as much as the story is Murray and his phenomenal heart and his grit and resilience, I've never seen anything like. Well, I have. No, we always say we've never seen anything like that. Most of the great sports people have it. And, you know, he's no more or no less than any of those other great sports people. It was such a strange match, even just for me, sort of my experience of it, because I was doing so many different things during the course of the match. I mean, I started watching a bit, and then I was doing a bit of work. I was watching the same time doing some scouting of Henry and Julian's opponents for tonight while it was on, and then I went to the gym and watched it a little bit on my phone in the gym, and then came back, cooked my dinner, had my dinner, made a few phone calls, sat and watched a bit. Did a bit more scouting, and then was still going on. And I text my mate, because at the start of it, I'm in a WhatsApp group with a couple of mates who watch tennis, and I sent a message, say early on in the day, saying Murray's getting absolutely tonked, because at the very start of the match he was. I mean, Kokkinakis was just teeing off, and I sent them a message later on saying I sent this message 6 hours ago, and they're still playing. But yeah, it was just such an odd match. A great match, you know. I think a lot of the time we call great matches, as I've said before, I think a lot of the times we refer to the Nadal Djokovic matches as great matches, and the level was phenomenal in those matches, but it was also a bit samey, whereas this one just seemed to have a bit more personality and such, didn't it?
Yeah, and I had watched the Ruud Brooksby match, which feels like about 3 days ago, but it was in fact this morning or yesterday. Well, I don't know. It was recently, and that was quite. It was good in places, but there was a lot of just backhand to backhand long rallies, and it didn't have much character. And you know, great for Jenson Brooksby to win, and great for Casper Ruud to admit afterwards that doing a 3-week tour of South America with Rafael Nadal probably wasn't the best way to prepare for the Australian Open. Anyway, that's for another day. But as you say, this match had so much more character, and you know, Murray is very popular down here, and obviously it was an Australian crowd, and therefore they were more in favour of him, but he is very popular for everything that he's achieved down here. There are lots of Scots in Melbourne as well, and plenty of them turned out. The biggest shame... I mean, let's talk about the tennis first. There's lots of other things we can talk about. Let's talk about the tennis first. Calvin, 5-6 in the third set tiebreaker in a set that Kokkinakis has led in with a break twice, and in fact served, I think, for the match. And 5-6 in the breaker, he comes to the net and the ball is floating at, I would say, shoulder height. What on earth happens next?
Yeah, it's funny because at that stage I was at mum and dad's watching it with my dad, and I was sort of had a mouthful of food, and I remember my exact statement was like, I just said, "Oh, he's missed it," and then my dad had sort of was watching it, but had just assumed he'd put it away, and my dad went, "What? He's missed it?" And I said, "Yeah," and like it was one of those shots, like you couldn't believe it. You couldn't be. It wasn't just he missed it; it was how far he missed it. He must have he put it wide of the tram line, I think.
Yeah, he missed it by a distance.
Yeah, and that's somebody who's not, who's a decent volleyer. Like he's won a Grand Slam. They're playing doubles, and his face was just disbelief when they showed him. Like he couldn't believe what was going on, but I think sort of it was one of those where it was disbelief. He couldn't believe what was going on, but it's still at that stage probably still thought, yeah, I'm still winning this.
Yeah,
because the guy's 37 and he's got a metal hip, and it's already past the time when he's being up at any stage. But yeah, I think that was probably the turning point. That was the stage where it went from Kokkinakis being heavy favourite to 50-50, I think.
He just, I mean, look, mentally playing Andy Murray, I compared it a little bit, and it wasn't anywhere near the same level of epic match, but the Raducanu-Goff match from the other night, where Raducanu actually, in the second set, played pretty well and struck the ball pretty well. But the problem with playing Coco Gauff is you have to hit 4 winners to win 1 point. And Andy Murray, in this kind of mood, is very similar. And, in the first 2 sets, he was trying to play a game, and Kokkinakis is seeing it like a beach ball and, as you say, teeing off. But by the sort of 3-hour mark, which was about the end of the 3rd set, he was just running on instinct. And Andy Murray's instincts are to run and get and make your life difficult. And he did that incredibly well, and then also started firing. And the 4th set kind of felt inevitable. Like at no point in the 4th set did I really think that Kokkinakis was going to win it there and then. I was like, this is going 5, and then it's a bit of a coin flip, and a coin flip in the 5th you probably back Murray maybe 55%, 60%. And I just, when he gets into that 5th set, everything changes about his game. Like, he started serving bigger. He started hitting his forehand the way that we've talked about him needing to be able to hit a lot. He still can't hit a volley. I don't know what's happened to his volleys, but
I thought he volleyed better in the second half of the match, actually. I thought he got a lot better than what I'd seen him in the last 6 months to a year.
Well, why has that happened? Like,
I think I can only assume it's confidence. There's no other reason why it would be. His technique's decent on the volley. He has good he's great hands, great skill. I think it's one of those. He's missed a lot, and it's in his head that he's missed a lot, and probably more so than at any other stage in his career.
Yeah.
It's almost better. He almost volleys better when he doesn't have time to think about it. His main problem, though, and I said this, I messaged you when the match was going on, James, that he's still, if he could put away mid-court forehands, he'd win these matches a whole lot easier. Because he still has his second serve's never been great, but his first serve is decent. But he still doesn't. He just can't put mid-court forehands away.
Yeah.
And there was one point. It was a big one. I can't remember what it was. I meant to make a note and I forgot. It was maybe in the 3rd set breaker, or maybe before it got to the breaker. A huge point it was, and he hit a massive first serve down the tee. And Kokkinakis has just floated a return back on his return, and then on ball 4. Kokkinakis has hit a clean winner forehand from inside the baseline. And you think, how have you got to a stage where you're inside the baseline on that shot?
Yeah.
When, and it was because Murray, he got the mid-court and he just did nothing with it.
And I think it's contrast in some ways to, and I don't know why this is, but against Berrettini, he gave Berrettini very little to tee off against. He gave him very little opportunity for forehand aggression. Kokkinakis' forehand is different, but they're both massive weapons, and he understood what he had to do. And I don't know, maybe just with having already had 1 5-setter this week, didn't quite have the physicality to be able to get in positions to focus the ball quite so much into the backhand wing. But yeah, that put away forehand only really in the last maybe half an hour, 40 minutes of the match did it really seem to start firing, and he hit a brilliant forehand to break in the crucial break at 5-all in the fifth. It was a fabulous inside-out forehand that really did roll back the ears. And then on match point, the backhand down the line, sort of flattening it out. I mean, it's just sort of vintage Murray stuff. But one thing I thought, and Murray talked about it afterwards, we had a quick chat with him. He was obviously quite keen to get to bed, and he complained a lot about the scheduling, and maybe it's something we'll talk about with George, who isn't here because he's at work, I think, or something. I don't know what time it is or what day it is, but he's not here in a full pod at the weekend. But the scheduling is such that the day matches, of which there are 3, ran long. Murray didn't get on court till 10:20 and was pretty annoyed to get off court at 4:05, obviously. But he also talked a lot about the conditions. Now, Calvin, you've obviously got Julian and Henry down in Australia, who I saw won their first round of the doubles today and are through to the second round of a Grand Slam, which is a huge achievement and a massive congrats to them and to you, of course. But I'd be interested to know what, if anything, they've said about the balls, the Dunlop balls specifically, because the impression that almost everyone I've spoken to this week is that the courts are actually pretty quick, but the balls fluff up so quickly that you can get very little out of them after a game or two.
They haven't said much about the balls. They said the courts bounce pretty low. I don't think you can do anything about the balls fluffing up because that's humidity. That's going to happen. I don't think we've ever got out of that in Australia, and I don't think we probably ever will. So yeah, it's hard to have a great deal of sympathy as a tennis coach with balls when they change them every 7 and 9 games. For most any tennis coach who's listening, and we ain't changing them every 7 and 9 months. Some of them, so like the way that some of these players complain about the balls, then it's a bit like, yeah, all right, fair enough. But yeah. And you change them often. I'm sort of semi-joking in that, but the most you're ever playing with those balls is maybe 3 or 4 games when they're knackered.
Yeah.
So, it's not great to have to serve with them in that, and in doubles even more so because holding serve is so paramount in doubles. So if you're having to serve with the balls on, say, the 8th game, that can be tough. But that's the case anywhere.
Yeah. Before we move on, we should talk a little bit about, as I say, I caught a little bit of Henry and Julian this morning, as I think it was, as they came through in straight sets. I very nearly forgot that it was 3 sets, not 5, because they won the second set and they started like celebrating, and I was like, lads, bit early, innit? You got another set to win. And then like, oh no,
they didn't celebrate much actually.
No,
muted, wasn't it?
It was quite muted, but I was like, a hug for just winning the second set. I'm not convinced about that. But yes, it is of course best of 3. Tell me a bit about how they felt about the match, and being in the second round of a slam for the first time. It's a big deal, but they seem pretty level-headed.
Yeah, they're very level-headed. I think the opponents weren't great, to be fair. They
singles players.
They were singles players. You could tell that because in the whole match they didn't cross once off serve, and they didn't play I formation once either. So it was you've got to beat everybody who's in front of you, but that was a great draw for the lads, and they proved that they're a level above that as well. They're a quality doubles pair. And they proved that today. They sort of brushed aside those two, but they play again tonight, and it'd be a different contest. They're playing Haase and Middlecoop, and Haase is absolutely a doubles. Middlecoop's absolutely a doubles player, and Haase is a singles player, but also plays very decent doubles. So
they're the number 16 seeds as well, right? So that's a step up. I mean, but they must be loving the chance. I mean, I know they've not been playing together that long, so it's not like they've been grinding away as a pair, but these guys, this is what they dream of, right? Like, this is what they want to be doing. Yeah,
absolutely. You want to be at the big tournaments. That's the thing, and for them at their ranking as well, because of it's tough at doubles to get up the rankings. So if they want to try and get into Miami and Indian Wells, which is only, I guess, 6-7 weeks away, they need to get the Grand Slam points, because the 250 points are probably not going to do it for them, and the 250s are all they're getting in at the minute. They made a semi-final of the 250 2 weeks ago, and they only went up, I think, 3 places.
Whereas, but just by winning a round, I think they jump up 7 places at the Grand Slam.
Is it that
So
many? I know that. Yeah,
I
it's
think it's
90 points, and I think
Yeah.
it's maybe 150 or something for if they win tonight.
Well, best of luck, of course. The match may be over by the time anyone listens to this, but that just depends on my turning things around. Let's move on and talk about Rafa Nadal, because look, there's a lot of stories that have gone on this week, and we're not going to be able to talk about all of them, and in the full pod we'll pick out the best ones. But the Nadal story is massive. We knew coming into this tournament that he wasn't in great shape, but he had managed to deal with the first round. He got through that okay. He seemed to be moving all right, and all the various injuries. Okay, Jack Draper probably, if he had been fit for the whole match, might well have troubled him, but Nadal looked relatively decent. I mean, Calvin, before we come on to Nadal's injury, it's worth, because we haven't talked about it with you, talking about Jack taking on Rafa. I mean, it says a lot about the guy that when I spoke to him afterwards, he said, I felt in control of the match at the beginning of the third set, having just won the second.
Yeah, he did, and he was right when he said that. And as I said on the last pod, I thought he'd beat Nadal, and I think he would have beat him if he'd have stayed, if the cramp hadn't have come. But cramp's one of those things that you can't ever plan for, and it just happened. But he was in control of the match. He was dominant in that second set, and I think that would have continued.
It's hard to watch a guy, especially at the beginning of his career, biggest match of his career, first time playing on laver, first time playing Rafa, all these things, and then go through what he did with the cramping. But cramp is also, it's preventable, right? Like it's something that you can work out why it happens, you can get yourself fitter, and you can get yourself into a place where you can prevent it, right?
Yeah, but also it's one of those things that you can't ever 100% guarantee it's not going to happen. It just tends to happen. You can reduce the likelihood that it's going to happen, but I don't think, you still see, there's a reason why you still see the world's greatest athletes sometimes cramp.
Yeah.
And
it's worth pointing out as well that Jack, and he said this afterwards, although he sort of had to be forced to say it because he didn't want to give an excuse, because I think that's the kind of guy he is. He planned to do a 7-week pre-season. He only ended up doing 2 weeks of that because he got ill twice. Just about everyone who went to Battle of the Brits got ill. I heard Joe Salisbury basically gave everyone the lurgy that I know a lot of people have had. It's not COVID, but it's like COVID. I had it. It was horrible. And I think Jack missed a couple of weeks of training with that as well. And that obviously takes a lot out of you from the physical perspective if you can't train properly. So I feel kind of sorry for him on that front. He says he's going to try and get a physical block in now, but it's a tricky time of the season. Indian Wells and Miami are coming up. I know IMG certainly won't want him to miss those. Then you're into the clay, which obviously isn't his favourite surface, but he'll be direct entry to the French Open, and he'll want to move there and have a few tournaments under his belt. I mean, it's tricky, isn't it, Calvin, the way the pro season is shaped, because if you don't get pre-season in the off-season, such as it is, you kind of have to sacrifice tournaments to do it, don't you? You have to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to play through these 3 tournaments, and instead I'm going to put some physical work in.
Yeah, and it's more complicated for Jack and the British lads, because they've got to go to Bogota. And I think most of the lads, I think the lads who are still there are going to go straight from Melbourne now to Colombia.
For context, Great Britain playing Colombia in Davis Cup tie away from home at altitude on clay straight after the Australian Open. I spoke to Jamie Murray about it today, and his wife is from Bogota, and he said, yeah, it's a really hard place to go because as soon as you get off the plane and start walking around, you feel it. Even him, he's a professional athlete, and he says even I first couple of days. And then, there's also the issue with the balls where you can play pressurised or non-pressurised balls. And, actually Jamie made an interesting argument, Calvin, which you might be able to speak to, which is that if you play with pressureless balls, they don't fly in altitude, but they feel completely different coming off the racket. So Jamie's argument was actually you should play with pressured balls because at least they feel the same on the racket and you just have to adjust the way you hit the ball.
Yeah, it's one of those, but neither of them feel anything like a normal tennis ball. That's the thing. Like you don't. He's right. The actual ball, the normal pressured ball that they play with, feels the same off the racket. It just flies all over the shop and is uncontrollable.
Hmm.
Whereas the pressureless ball feels strange off the racket, but it's a more similar flight path once it leaves your racket. So there's no real ideal situation there. But yeah, he's right for it. It's just it feels like a heavier ball that when you're hitting a pressureless ball.
Rafa Nadal usually got opinions on tennis balls. In fact, he had opinions on tennis balls here in in Melbourne. He didn't like the balls, as it happened, as almost no one does. But usually, when Nadal says he doesn't like the balls, he wins the tournament, just as he did at the French Open 3 years ago. He's not going to win this tournament. He's out. He lost to Mackenzie McDonald in straight sets. McDonald was completely outplaying him even before Rafa pulled up injured in the second set, took a medical timeout, and then limped his way through the third set, which McDonald took well. He revealed afterwards that he had been managing this problem for a couple of days. It was something he had felt, and it got worse during the match. He's now revealed that it's going to rule him out for 6 to 8 weeks, and doesn't really know about the sunshine swing in America, but is confident he'll be back for the clay. Calvin, I wrote a piece for the Eye this week entitled "Will Rafa Nadal retire?" The answer, of course, is yes. Eventually, everyone does, but imminently, I don't know. It was interesting watching his body language during that third set because, as you know, during a changeover, Rafa is usually like fidgeting. He's adjusting bottles. He's making sure his drinks are at the right level. He's fiddling with tape, with rackets, and in that third set, his changeovers, he just sat and stared. Like, it was almost weird. One of the changeovers, he just sat and stared at the ceiling. The roof was closed. One of them, he just stared straight ahead and then eventually, stuck his head between his knees. I mean, I felt like it was a guy really considering whether he wanted to do this all again.
Yeah, you get the feeling he knows. He knows there's not long left, and it's just how long he can get out of it. But it's such a funny one, isn't it? We've said the same. I looked at him. I think it was the U.S. Open last year, and you just wonder, how does he leave this? How does he possibly leave this when you look at how he competes and the theatre that he creates? How do you walk away from it? And I wondered today the same when I was watching Murray. It's like you think that you're thinking. The automatic response is to think: are they thinking, can I still be competitive? Can I still win at this level? But then you saw when the crowd was still there, the crowd was full and they were going nuts, and he won that point where he was sticking the lobs up. You just wonder whether sometimes they don't even care whether they win or lose. They just don't want to leave this behind, or they don't want. It's not really they don't care whether they win or lose. They do. They deeply care, but they just want to keep seeing if they can. And once you draw a line under it, that then goes.
Yeah.
There's no replacing it. That doesn't matter what level it is. And I always tell players, probably say this the same. Regular listeners will have heard me say it before. When players at any level are thinking about saying, "I'm thinking about stopping," once you stop, you'll never play another match where there's something on it at 5-all in the third set or something like that. You might play some friendly stuff and you might play some club tennis, but you'll never play anything that's meaningful because you can't recreate that. It's impossible. So when you're gonna stop, make sure you're ready for that's it. That's the last time you'll ever play anything meaningful. And I don't know how they can possibly walk away from it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Federer just had to be dragged kicking and screaming, but I think he doesn't... not to say the Federer isn't competitive, but when he got humped at Wimbledon, when Hurkacz absolutely rammed him, he was like, well, I don't want that to happen again. And
yeah.
Whereas, I think Murray and Nadal were like, okay, I'll do something different. Federer, I think, went, well, no, I'll just retire because I don't want to do that again. Whereas Murray, and that was what was kind of different about this match that he won tonight, he has lost that match before. When he beat James Duckworth in something like 4.5 hours, or when he beat Yoshihito Nishioka at the US Open, or when he beat Nicholas Basilashvili here last year, every time he came back 2 days later and got absolutely panned because he basically woke up next morning and couldn't walk. Whereas this time he came back, played 5 sets and won. And that is a totally different experience, I think, compared to what maybe what the others have gone through. But yeah, as you say, it's an incredibly hard thing to walk away from. And
I think as well, it's interesting hearing Murray's wording of it. It's always, as long as I'm competitive, I'll keep playing. And then that's changed from I want to win the slams. You know, and I think that's where he's at now. As long as he'd have loved every minute of that match today.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know what Andy Murray does, and I don't know Rafa Nadal at all. I know Andy Murray a little bit, but you know, I don't know Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic at all. I don't know what they do. Federer always seemed like he was the one who's probably most capable of it, of just walking away from it. And Djokovic, the next one, I've always thought the two who you just think, how are they going to stop doing this, is Murray and Nadal.
Yeah, they not to say that they don't have other things going on in their life. I mean, Murray has.
Oh no, it's nothing that. It's more just like this one element of it, and it's just the competing.
Yeah,
that they've done it all their lives as well, James. That's the thing. It's not like when you retire at something else. You know, when you retire from your job, you've probably only started doing that job at 23, 24 or later. You got to remember with Andy Murray and Rafa Nadal and Roger Federer and Novak Djokovic, this is something they've done since they were 5 years old.
Yeah, they don't remember anything else. There's no memory of life without tennis.
Yeah.
I just quickly want to kind of glance my eye across the rest of the draw to some interesting players who've kind of come through it. I mean, there's an absolute contingent of Americans come through the draw of all shapes and sizes. In the bottom half alone, we've got Ben Shelton, JJ Wolf, Michael Moe, Tommy Paul, and Jensen Brooksby all through to the third round. Now, Ben Shelton, Calvin, is someone that people are very excited about. I think he's the NCAA singles champion, and much is expected of him. But he's never been outside America, which probably tells you a lot about how much developmental tennis you can play just inside the United States, I suppose, doesn't it?
I didn't know that. He never left America.
Literally never left the country. His flight to Australia was the first time he left.
That's amazing, because his dad was a tennis player as well.
Yeah, his parents met in Australia.
And his dad is the head coach of University of Florida.
Oh, right. So, I didn't know that.
Of Florida State, whichever the Gators are.
Yeah, that's UF.
University. Yeah. So you'd think he would have been well travelled, but no. I mean, he's a hell of a player, is Ben. Nice kid as well. He's got an absolute cannon of a serve, and he's got as well maybe the best overhead I've ever seen anyone have. Go on.
No.
No, he's the speed at which he can get back at, and the way that he can slam it down straight into the ground. It is genuinely like an NBA player slam dunking. I don't think I've ever seen him miss one, and I've never seen him not put one away thunderously.
Well, he's got an extremely good chance of making a quarterfinal here. He's going to play wildcard Alexei Popyrin, who's very talented, but it's just come through 5 sets against Taylor Fritz in the third round. If he wins that, he'll play either JJ Wolf or Michael Moe. Michael Moe, by the way, with 2 M's OH. Is a lucky loser in the draw. He replaced David Goffin, who was ill at the last minute. Michael Moe had already booked his flight home. He was actually packing his bags in his hotel room and had checked out when he was rung to say he'd got a lucky loser space. So had to rapidly cancel his flight and check back in. He then beat Lekoli in 5 sets in the first round, beat Alexander Zverev in 4 sets in the second round, and has a hell of a chance to go quite a lot further. So I actually watched him play Benoit Paire in qualifying, and I felt quite sorry for him then, because Benoit Paire was being Benoit Paire, and I always think it's unfortunate when you're on the other side of the net from that. But he's got a fabulous chance, as does anyone in the bottom half, I would say, and that includes Andy Murray. I mean, hell, he's got Roberto Bautista Agut next, which feels like an absolute nightmare opponent when you've just played a 6-hour match. But I refuse to put limits on what Andy Murray can do now, because he just keeps surprising me. He keeps Cam Norrieing me. Which is convenient, because I want to ask you about Cam Norrie, Calvin, or specifically his opponent, because he also had a late night match the other night. He beat Constant Lestienne in 4 sets that finished about 2 in the morning on an outside court. Now, is Constant Lestienne not someone that you have mentioned previously as someone making their way up the ranks?
He is, but maybe not in a positive light. He is. If you wanted to, if you thought that, if anyone thought that Corentin Moutet is a one-off, Constant Lestienne is evidence that he's not. Read what you will into that.
But he is inside. I mean, he's 30 and he's inside the top 100 for the first time. Like, he's now 60 in the world, and he did give Cam quite a lot of problems, and he's pretty unpredictable.
Luke, who I coach, played him at doubles at Ilkley Challenger last year, and he played with what's the guy called? The other French guy who really dropped down the rankings, Lucas Pouy.
Oh yeah.
And Lucas Pouy has a bit of a short temper. And Lestienne got into an argument with Luke's partner, Aidan McHugh, and Lucas Pouy said something along the lines of to Lestienne, "If he doesn't hit you first, I am." To his own partner. And yeah, he's that kind of. He's just one of those guys who like Moutet, I guess a little bit like Fognini, who they just can't not do it. They can't not shithouse. Like, it just comes the shithousing comes so naturally to them that they don't even have to think about it like a tactical, like, mind games or something. Goes beyond mind games. They don't even know they're doing it.
Well, speaking of shithousery, I watched Jenson Brooksby versus Casper Ruud today, and I think Jenson Brooksby might be the biggest shithouse on the tour. He regularly celebrates net cords without any apology, which I think you would be in favour of, Calvin, because you think the apology is nonsense. He also today, when Casper Ruud was, to be fair, a little bit injured and breakpoint down, Casper Ruud, went to get a ball, stuck it up in the air as you do, just because it was all he could do, and it was landing. It was inside the doubles tram line, but it was clearly landing out. And Jenson Brooksby took a massive swing at it and deliberately missed it to let it bounce out, and then break serve and jogged off to his seat, which I don't think I've ever seen before in a Grand Slam match.
He's just anybody who's watched any college tennis will recognise all of what Jenson Brooksby does. Because it's just like, and some people talk about it like it's the college tennis thing. When you hear somebody go like, it's so college, it's stuff like that. And it spoke about both. Some people talk about it in a derogatory way, and other people talk about it in a positive way. I'm definitely of the latter of that. Most of what goes off really is ridiculous. And in no other walk of life would you not get a good hiding for behaving the way that college tennis players do.
Yeah,
but,
I do think Casper Ruud probably had some pretty stern words with him in the knowing Casper Ruud. I think he may have had a few words to say to him afterwards in the locker room. As I say, Casper Ruud did get a medical timeout during that match for an upper leg injury, and he did admit afterwards that probably swanning around South America playing exhibition matches might have been better off replaced with some rest and then some pre-season fitness.
I just wanted to speak as well while we're on injuries about Djokovic's, which I'm convinced is another just absolute myth. Look, I thought about it today. I was actually driving when he was playing, and on the radio they were talking about this hamstring injury he's got. Right, anybody who has ever had a hamstring injury of any level will know that if you have a hamstring injury of any level, you are not playing competitive sport at that level. It is impossible. Like it's like trying to drive a car where the brakes have gone. The brake lead has snapped. That's what the hamstring is. It's what helps you decelerate.
Yeah.
And the pain that goes through the back of your leg is It's not only the pain is unbearable, your leg doesn't work, because you don't have the deceleration muscle there. So I don't believe he's got an injury at all. I really don't.
I think you're probably right, and we know that Djokovic likes to ham up injuries, for whatever reason. I think probably there is something there. I think probably he does think his hamstring is a bit tight or a bit pulley.
You can feel it being tight. Yeah, this is the thing. You can feel it being tight, but that's resolvable by stretching or a massage and that kind of thing, and it would move away, and you wouldn't necessarily have it strapped up. But it's not like you can't go. You don't have a niggle in the hamstring. That's not one of those things you can have. It's the nature of the muscle that it is. You can't have a niggle on it. You can have different degrees of pain and tear and pull, but once you've got that, it's impossible to run. Yeah. You can't run. And also, I don't know whether our listeners know this. The hamstring is factually the slowest healing muscle in the human body. So it's not like one of those you can go, well, he's going to maybe try and get through the first week and hopes it gets better. So because it won't get long. It's basically even if you've just pulled your hamstring, you're basically 6 weeks without running.
He says he's not going to practice on days in between matches in an effort to give himself a better chance to recover, but obviously take that with a pinch of salt. It was good enough today to see off Enzo Quecao, who I feel like you might have come across at some point in your travels.
I have, yeah. And Enzo Cacao, actually, he's one of the very few players to have beat Henry and Julian in the last 6 months.
Is that right?
Randomly, yeah. And it was a match that I'd actually forgotten about. And it wasn't that long ago. I think it was only like September.
Yeah.
But I was looking through their results the other day, going back sort of to the summer. And I thought, oh, God, yeah, completely forgot about that match. It was him and another singles guy who beat them.
He born in Mauritius. He's a sort of 27-year-old journeyman who's scraped his way in and made it to the second round for the first time. He did take a set off Djokovic, which was quite impressive, to be fair, but then Djokovic bageled him in the fourth set to really hammer home the how injured he was in terms of his hamstring. Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of with you. I think probably the truth lies somewhere in between.
If it was anything else, I think it would be up for... It's the injury that he says he's got. I won't accept. I've had bad hamstring. I've had hamstring injuries before, and I know people who've had them. And I'm still, through years and years of playing and watching sport, I'm still to see anybody who can have a minor hamstring injury and still compete.
Very finally, Calvin, we're going to ask George to do a little report on the WTA draw. So we'll stick with the ATP for my last question. I'm going to read you the top remaining seeds, not including Djokovic, and I want you to pick who you think is the biggest threat to him for the title. Stefanos Tsitsipas, Andrei Rublev, Felix Auger-Aliassime, Daniil Medvedev, or Holger Rune?
Felix.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. He's beaten him. Beat him at United Cup, didn't he? Not United Cup.
Laver Cup.
Laver Cup. And I don't read... He's not been in great form the first two matches, but I don't read loads into that.
I mean, he's a stat I found the other day. He's only ever won his first round match at a slam in straight sets twice. Like, he's such a slow starter for whatever reason. Yeah,
weird, isn't he? He seems to go 2 sets to love down and then just cruise through the next 3.
Yeah, those classic 5-set matches where you play badly for 2 sets and well for 3.
Yeah, to be fair, any of those guys could. I mean, Tsitsipas actually looked quite decent. Rune's been in good form, although he's played crap opponents. I
mean, Medvedev is the one for me because he's gone about his business very well. He's obviously got a good record in Australia. And I think with the conditions as they are, you mentioned the boys saying the ball is bouncing quite low. I think that's because of the ball and the humidity. I think that'll suit his flat hit. I think it'll make him... Yeah. Whereas, the guys like Tsitsipas are putting a bit more shape on the ball. I think they might struggle to get as much purchase or as much change out of the conditions.
You can't write Medvedev off. He's won a slam. He's been in other finals. He's just doesn't look the same player to me. And I think as well, when he played Djokovic the other week, it looked like Djokovic had his number, which he's not had previous.
Well, we'll see exactly what we get out of Medvedev against Sebastian Korda, his first real test. Stefanos Tsitsipas up against Talangri-Ekspor, which I've picked as my upset because, well, you've got to pick an upset in the third round. It's very difficult. But that match probably will take place by the time you listen to this. We'll get a bit of George, so you'll hear a bit about the WTA, but we will be back over the weekend to look forward to the second week of the Aussie Open.
Sports Social, now on the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello, I'm Brian McClare. I used to kick a football around for Celtic and Manchester United. McClare! Yeah! These days I'm joined by special guests to talk anything and everything on my podcast, Life with Brian.
When you meet footballers, you just giddy out here. You kind of like, they've lived your dreams.
Me and Bez are inseparable a lot of the time.
So join me and listen to Life with Brian, the Brian McClare podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the second half, and you may well notice that it is a different cast for this half, which is very exciting for you and slightly bad news for me. I was out enjoying a nice dinner in Golders Green, a nice place called Tofu Vegan, which I highly recommend. There's a few different establishments of that across London that are very nice if you happen to have a go. And I was thinking, oh, well, James and Calvin are going to have done the podcast earlier this evening. I'll look forward to listening to that later. And I get a text from what I can only assume is a greatly sleep-deprived James Gray asking me to come and record the second half of the podcast on my own later on. So here I am. It's about 10 o'clock in the UK, a couple of hours before the Australian Open kicks off again. And I'm going to take you through a recap of the women's draw so far ahead of the start of the third round tomorrow, or by the time you're listening, probably today. So it's been a pretty interesting start to the women's draw. I'm going to take it section by section. Just as a quick side note, I'm always very impressed by James's ability to do these monologues. He really is quite capable of just chatting to himself for a long time and keeping it engaging. So I do apologize in advance for not being quite as skilled at that as he is, but I will give it my best go, and I think we'll have a good time together, even if we're missing James's glorious broadcasting skills and Calvin's dry cutting ability to chop people down and deliver his tactical analysis in the driest way possible. I'll do my best to factor in a bit of both as we go along. So in the section one of the draw, in the women's side, we've got Iga Swiatek, who is the clear, obvious favourite to win this section. I think everyone would kind of agree with that. And she's a very, very popular pick in fantasy tennis. Some would say you're almost crazy not to pick her. She's that good. And it's been relatively plain sailing for her so far. Past Jules Niemeyer, past Osorio in round two. Facing one of the more interesting stories so far, facing Kristina Bushka in round three. This is a qualifier. She's a fairly, well, not young, but fairly new to the kind of Grand Slam scene, if you like. Only reached the first round of the French Open last year. She had her debut in a Grand Slam was in the first round of the US Open 2021. And this is her first time past the second round. So well done to her. It would be some shock for the 25-year-old Spaniard to take out Swiatek, but she has beaten Bianca Andreescu, former US Open champion. Of course, has struggled to hit those highs since Andreescu, and it's a bit of a shame we perhaps didn't get that Swiatek Andreescu third round, but it'll be interesting to see how Bushka does. Then the winner of that will be taking on Elena Rybakina, the Wimbledon champion. It's nice to see her back in some form. She's had a really solid start, 2 straight sets wins against Cucurella and Kaya Juvan. And she'll take on Danielle Collins, who came through one of the best matches at the second round, I thought, against someone who long-time listeners of the pod will know. I'm a big fan of Karolina Muchova, who's had a lot of injury troubles in recent times, really strong Czech player, and she's had some good results here in the past. And she pushed Danielle Collins, who of course reached the final last year, really, really close. It was 7-6 Muchova in the first set, 2-6 Collins in the second, and it went down to a deciding championship tiebreak, which Collins won 10-6. So that'll be a pretty tasty third round match between Rybakina and Collins, and Swiatek is guaranteed to get a serious test in the last 16, even if Bushka doesn't quite provide it. So that's the first section of the draw, how that's played out so far. On to section two. From a British perspective, it would be remiss of me not to speak about Emma Raducanu. I think we can all agree probably par for the course for Raducanu, given the issues she was facing with her ankle kind of coming into the event. She obviously eased past Korpatch in the first round, which we all said was a good draw. I suspected Korpatch might win from the perspective of we just didn't know where Raducanu was in terms of fitness, but Emma did a good job there. And then, defeat to Coco Gauff, there's no shame in that at the minute. Gauff, one of the top players on the tour. Close second set, went to a tiebreak, but I think that's about as good as we really could have expected from Raducanu at this tournament, given the context coming into it. So Gauff is going to play Bernarda Pera, the compatriot, in the third round. The winner of that will take on Yelena Ostapenko, who's started really well, or Katerini Bayindi, 28-year-old Ukrainian. Again, not not a great history of great Grand Slam results. Never been past the first round at Wimbledon. A couple of second round appearances at the French and the US Open, but this is her first time in the third round of a Grand Slam as well. We all know how unpredictable the women's draw can be, but you have to say an Ostapenko-Goff fourth round would be pretty tasty. One former Grand Slam champion in Ostapenko, and Goff is someone we're all expecting to be picking up slams in the future. So that could be a really interesting match if we get that. Section 3 sees one of the favourites for the tournament, Jessica Bakula. She's made a really strong start. Thrashed Christian from Romania in the first round, love and won, and eased past Sasnovich 2 and 6 in round 2. Facing Marta Kostyuk in the third round. Kostyuk, of course, had her big breakout here at the Australian Open many years ago as a really young teenager. Maybe hasn't quite reached the heights that some thought she might at that stage, but no time like the present to break out. She's still relatively young. Well, relatively young is probably harsh. She's still 20 years old, but given how young it was when she kind of made that big burst here, it feels like she's been around a long time. I suppose she has. So that'll be an interesting match as well. And the winner could be the return of kind of Barbara Krejcikova, who, won the French Open, was in really good form, one of the top players in the women's tour, and then struggled so much with injury last year. Really good to see her back. Okay, she's faced 2 qualifiers in the first 2 rounds, but won comfortably. She plays Kalinaya, who shocked Krejcikova's Petra Kvitova with a 7-5, 6-4 win, and also beat former Grand Slam semi-finalist Coco van der Wey. Section 4, we've got Madison Keys taking on Azarenka. That's a really good third round tie. Lots of good third round ties in the women's draw this time. And the winner of that likely playing Maria Sakkari. Sakkari's taking on Zhu Lin from China, the 28-year-old. Again, a third round Grand Slam debutant after a really surprise result for Zhu, beating Jill Teichmann 6-2, 6-2. I think I said probably a case of the curse of the commentator from me last week, where I said Teichmann's always very, very solid. Not quite this time, but she was solid enough to knock out the other British hopeful in the women's draw, Harriet Dart, 7-5, 6-1, which I think we had all predicted would happen. So that's the top half of the draw. It's looking pretty exciting. I think we'll potentially get some really good fourth round matches there. Section 5 was one that me and James had a bit of a disagreement over whether we thought this was a good section or not last week, I think. But it's kind of fallen apart as I thought it might, with Kasatkina surprisingly losing 1-1 to Gracheva in the first round. Gracheva's gone on to reach the third round, where she's facing one of my top fantasy picks. And my team's named after Karolina Pliskova. It's Plisko Inferno, which isn't one of my better names, but better than nothing. And then someone who's really popular from a fantasy perspective for her name, if nothing else, Katie Volinet. Probably the perfect name for a tennis player. She stunned the 9th seed, Kudermetova, in 3 sets, 6-4, 2-6, 6-2. And she takes on Zhang Shui. So this feels like a really open section. I thought Pliskova would come through it, which is why I backed her. And I'm at great pains to say she probably should come through from this position. But knowing her, it'll almost certainly fall apart and kind of kill my fantasy team off in the process. So section 6, we've got Annette Kontaveit out, the 16th seed. She lost to Magda Linette, who we've seen kind of bring some upsets about over the years. It was nice to see Taylor Townsend back getting a win, and she actually won their first 3 sets of this tournament, 6-1, 6-1, 6-1. But unfortunately, particularly for me and my fantasy team, she crashed out to Alexandrova, the 19th seed. It was 6-1, 2-6, 3-6. And Alexandrova now faces Linette and will fancy her chances of reaching round 4, where she's likely going to face Caroline Garcia, who's made a pretty good start here, beating Sebov, the Canadian qualifier, and then a second Canadian and the more accomplished Leylah Fernandez. That was a really tight, interesting match. 7-6, 7-5. So that'll be potentially a pretty good fourth round as well between Garcia and Alexandrova, and then hopefully, from my perspective, reaching Pliskova in the quarterfinal of that section. In section 7, we've got Aryna Sabalenka flying 6-1, 6-4, 6-3, 6-1. We've spoken so many times about, will this be the slam where Sabalenka makes the breakthrough? And she's started, as we will hope she comes on. Nice to see Elise Mertens back, making a good little run at a slam as well. She's in the third round. She's reached the semi-finals here, of course, in 2018. Took out Galbine Muguruza in the first round, someone who just hasn't got going recently. And then Lauren Davis. So not the easiest first 2 rounds, but an interesting test for her now against Sabalenka. In the other side of section 7, Belinda Bencic playing some good stuff at the minute. The 25-year-old, obviously Olympic gold medal winner. She's going to face Camilla Giorgi, who was facing controversy over her potential COVID status. Reports in Italy had spoken about some allegations of fraud in there. But she is certainly no fraud in terms of her tennis this tournament, thumping Pavlyuchenkova 11-1, Pavlyuchenkova using her protected ranking, and then taking out qualifier Anna Karolina Schmiedlova 4-3. So you back Bencic and Sabalenka to be meeting in the fourth round, but Georgi and Mertens definitely now has a place, and that'll be an interesting set of matches as well. And then Section 8's probably been the most interesting section so far in terms of the big names on paper going out. The biggest, of course, was second seed Ons Jabeur, who battled past Zidansek in round 1. She's had 2 really big tussles in the first 2 rounds, but was beaten by Olympic silver medalist, former French Open runner-up, Marketa Vondrousova, again using a protected ranking. And Vondrousova will now go on to face her compatriot Hruvatova, one of the 2 Hruvatovas in the tournament. Really talented Czech sisters, Linda and Brenda. So that will be a really interesting match as well. And then the winner will take on one of Donna Vekic, back playing some good stuff in the third round of a slam. And another surprise package, Parisas Diaz, the 31-year-old from Spain. She is into the third round of the Australian Open for back-to-back years, having never gone past the first round in any of the other slams. So she clearly loves it out here. Some great results for her. She beat Beatrice Haddad-Maia, who is someone we've spoken about so much over the last year, how good she's been outside the slams. But when it comes to the slams, she has just completely failed to deliver, never gone past the second round of a slam. And she was the 14th seed here, which feels a real disconnect. Then beat Potapova, who beat one of my fantasy players, Sloane Stephens, who I picked basically because I just couldn't come up with anyone else, and immediately regretted it. And so it proved I should regret it. So yeah, that's really opened up this bottom section. I mean, Jabeur is someone we've spoken about quite a lot in terms of, will she go on to win a slam? I've always said no. It's another disappointing exit for her, but she's proven time and time again over the last year that she bounces back from bad results. So hopefully she'll get back into some good form. But I find it really tough to look past Swiatek at the minute. And if I was going to be picking a final, I'd probably be eyeing Swiatek, Sabalenka. I've got a bit of a feeling about Sabalenka that this is going to be the one. So cue her going out ASAP. I'm not sure if James actually did run through the fantasy results or not. No one's briefed me, so I apologize if I'm covering old ground, but just a quick congrats so far to Big Bods, Danny Boy, and Kazors, who are the top 3 fantasy players. Kazors incredibly has 9 of his 10 players left. James is doing very well, up in 19th, only 60 points off the lead with 7 players to go. I have been snaked, is how I would put it. I've lost 4 players, but two of them have been to bloody withdrawals. Can you believe it? That is absolutely unbelievable. I lost Nick Kyrgios and then David Goffin, who fell ill, and that one's really disappointing because he was in Zverev's section of the draw, and I really fancied him to kind of sneak through. So I was really gutted about that. But I am grateful to my wildcard Alexei Popyrin, who beat Taylor Fritz earlier. As I mentioned, Karolina Pliskova is in my team. And then I'm hoping for a Djokovic-Medvedev final in the men to carry me all the way to where I'm not quite sure. I probably can't win the whole thing unless my boy Popyrin keeps going, but you never know. That draw's really, really opened up. So I hope you're all enjoying that. So tomorrow, or today, as it probably is when you're listening, or maybe not even today, seeing as James always tells me people listen to podcasts in very weird ways I can't really imagine, particularly for something like tennis, where it feels you'd want to get your weekly updates. But we have Krejcikova versus Kalinaya tomorrow, and then on the Rod Laver Arena kicking us off from the women's perspective, we have Pegula versus Kostyuk. On Margaret Court, we have Kozlova, Ostapenko on 1573. And we have Rabkina Collins on the Kia Arena. Later on Margaret Court, we then have Swiatek and Buska, and then Pera and Goff on Laver. And then the night session, we've got Keys and Azarenka on Laver, and Zhu Sakari on Margaret Court. So really strong set of women's matches, which I'm told is what I'm covering. So I hope James did give you a run through the men's matches on tomorrow. Maybe I'll just do it just in case. So we've got Fuchsovics versus Sinner. That'll be a good one. Tsitsipas v Greek Spore. McDonald v Nishioka. Cherundolo, Auger-Aliassime. Nori Lehecka. Hurkacz, Shapovalov. Khachanov, TFO. Korda, Medvedev. Felt like those matches were getting stronger the more I read out. There's some really good ones towards the end. Hurkacz, Shapovalov, Khachanov, TFO, and Korda, Medvedev. 3 really nice round 3 ties. So that's about it from us this week. I'm sorry if I've bored you to death with my lovely monologue. As I said, James is far, far better at this than I am. But we will look to get together, the 3 of us, at some point over the next week, and I'm sure James will be attempting, once he's getting a little bit more sleep, to bring some much better monologue speaking than I am able to provide. Catch you all soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Sports Social Podcast Network.